Good morning or good afternoon to everyone. We'll get started here in about 1 minute. Welcome to all of you who have joined. We have a few more people joining us, so we might wait about 1 more minute to let everyone in from the waiting room, and we'll get started. All right, well, it's 1 minute after. Let's go ahead and get started. I think we might have a few more folks joining us, but good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. I am Mike Erickson, Associate Vice President for Community Engagement at Internet 2, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Modernizing the Campus Network to Support Success. A reminder that we're all on Zoom and we'd like you to mute. We'll try and keep an eye on that, but if you can also, that would be appreciated. Also, please feel free to post questions in the chat portion of your Zoom window, and the presenters will respond to them as they're able. We'll also reserve some time at the end for an interactive question-answer discussion. And we will be recording today's session, and it will be made available to everyone. So we're pleased to have with us today Jelene Crehan, Director of Network Engineering and Infrastructure at University of Illinois, Chicago. Jacqueline Pitter, Senior Strategic Consultant from Vantage Technology Consulting Group and former CISO and Infrastructure Administrator at Reed College. And last but not least, John Young, Vice President of Vantage Technology Consulting Group. So welcome to all of you, Jelene, Jacqueline, and John.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity. Looking forward. I see a lot of familiar faces or names in the list, and some I don't know, and I look forward to meeting the rest of you. Jacqueline will be sitting in the chat, helping to elevate questions and ideas, so please don't hesitate to ask us anything, and we'll try to keep going. If you see my head bouncing around in different directions, that's because I have a whole bunch of screens in front of me trying to manage the mess that is PowerPoint and Zoom all together. So apologies if it looks like I'm looking somewhere else. But Jelene and I are really looking forward to this. Jelene also has the power to control my screen, so we're going to see how well that goes together. So with that, Jelene, you want to tell us a little bit about UIC?
Sure. University of Illinois Chicago, UIC, is the city's largest university and its only public R1 institution. We spend about $460 million in research annually and have an enrollment of approximately 34,000 students. We have 16 colleges, including a new law school and a hospital with the College of Medicine. And we are among the most culturally and ethnically diverse institutions in the nation. And if anyone knows Chicago at all, the campus is just west of the downtown area. We're near the West Loop and about a mile away from the Willis Tower, or the Sears Tower if you're old school like me and you still call it the Sears Tower.
All right, so you're going to notice, first of all, some credit to despair.com. We have borrowed many of their images for use in our slide deck. Big fans of their work. Please try to, in addition to giggling at whatever they say on the screen, also pay a little attention to the things that we're doing here. But if you're not familiar with them, check out despair.com. There's a whole lot of funny stuff there. So I'm not going to read everything that's up on the left there to you, but we're really focusing together on the high level things that we think make a big difference in getting buy-in across an engagement with the institution for a successful network modernization. Today's conversation will be a lot less technical. We're going to focus on the stakeholder interviews and things like that. We're also going to talk a little bit about some of the lessons learned from what UIC has been through and from some of our other institutions that have been through this. And there will be no marketing sales of any sort. We're just going to talk about our world. Jelene,
Yeah.
This is your world.
I know, it is my world. So yes, our world, the UIC network, just to give a baseline, we have about 800 network closets on campus in 110 buildings, 6,000 access points. We average about 32,000 peak concurrent devices on our wireless network on any given day for campus, 2,000 network switches with 108 routers, 1,900 daily VPN users, 1,700 emergency StarTel circuits. These are the direct call buttons to our campus police dispatch. And that includes also our 300 elevator call buttons. And we also have 200 silent panic buttons underneath desks in offices and about 7,700 VoIP phones on campus.
And 2 data centers and an affiliated hospital and clinical operations. You're a large public R1 with all the things that go with it, and 2 campuses close together.
So what led UIC to modernize our network? The perception from the Chancellor's office was we only use one specific vendor for every aspect of our network, and it is the Cadillac vendor by cost. Why? Why are we not more vendor agnostic? And at the time, I didn't have a director. I was a senior wireless engineer turned into manager of the engineering team. We currently have 4 core engineers, 2 wireless engineers, and 2 VoIP engineers, so a very small team for the size campus that we have. So I brought this Chancellor's question up to the team, and no one had a solid answer to the question other than, this is what we've always done. I've been with the campus for nearly 25 years, and this is literally what we've always done. We've always had one vendor. So it's basically the easy button for us for a very long time. Our CIO at the time had put out an RFP to hire a consultant to help us develop a network strategic plan, and we've been engaged with Vantage since fall of 2019. We spent many days with Vantage collecting all of our data points, inventory counts, reviewing network maps, giving tours of some of our closets and those data centers. We were able to provide percentages of wireless coverage in a given campus building, and also percentages of old Cat3 wiring that is still in use in many areas on campus. And after spending a few weeks giving a baseline of our campus infrastructure and analyzing our current approach to our network, we quickly realized a few key indicators that we needed to make some changes. We are a very small team, and we are constantly putting out those fires of the day. We are tending to outages of switches failing due to a routine power outage, like power maintenance work from the utilities team on campus, or we come into campus in the morning, we find that a switch has failed over time, literally just due to its age. It was hard to lift our heads up from doing that daily grind work and thinking strategically of where we wanted to be and how we wanted to get there. And we realized we were facing years and years of deferred maintenance and considerable technical debt. And the future honestly was not looking very bright for our network in the current state that we were working in. Most importantly, we had a new Vice Chancellor of Innovation that was brought to campus. It was a new role created by the Chancellor. And that office created new goals for our institution with a solid focus on teaching and research. And we realized that we would need to come up with a solid plan from the network infrastructure team to achieve those goals.
So just a couple of definitions to level set. Technical debt, in its simplest terms, is that we're not doing something in the most modern way that we might want to. We're doing something in the way perhaps we've always done it, and maybe that's not the best way, that we haven't got up to date on our software and our approaches. Deferred maintenance is stuff that needs to have been replaced. That is past its is approaching its expiration date or past its expiration date, its supportability date. And so we have a lot of those kinds of things. I would certainly welcome some conversation actively in the chat, not just questions for us, but some active conversation amongst the participants of where you have been able to effectively document technical debt or deferred maintenance. In fact, one of the best challenge, one of the biggest challenges that we have that I would love a solution for is a way to accurately represent the level of deferred maintenance backlog in the network, in IT in general. There's some great approaches to that for facilities, but I've yet to see, I've seen some approaches, but nothing amazing for IT. And if any of you have a great answer, I'd love to see some of it. So we keep going. A note about Vantage. Again, we're not going to do any marketing or anything. We don't sell any stuff. We don't do any integration services. We just help people make good decisions. So all the things that Jelene talks about of the paths forward, we didn't come up with a bias that we want to sell a thing or do a thing like that. A quick plug on this slide and the next slide. We're talking a little bit about zero trust, or at least one definition of zero trust. The three of us, Jelene, myself, and Jacqueline, will all be at what do you call it? A community exchange in May, doing a presentation on different approaches to zero trust and role-based access control. And so hopefully some of you will also be in Atlanta in May and might come and sit down and be part of our press session, or just talk to us at a meal. So if you look on the right side of this, right, these are some of the most crucial in my mind, what I call major design elements for a modern network. First and foremost at the top right, automation and orchestration. If you are a large network like UIC, and like most of you as Internet 2 members or affiliate members, right, most of you are going to be R1s or at least large research institutions, doing things manually, as an awful lot of institutions still do, in my opinion, is not the best use of your time. Your people can provide value not doing the same thing 100 different times or 1,000 different times or thousands of different times, but letting the system do that and putting their intelligence in other ways. Not talking about having less people, I'm talking about getting the best value out of your people and about the stuff that you have. And so I find that to be really key. It also it reduces errors, right? If you're automating and orchestrating things, then you might be able to propagate an error really quickly, but you also are less likely to make errors frequently. And I've had to do this thing 100 times, and I made 2% of the time I made a mistake. I just want to differentiate. Automation to me is automating tasks within, in this case, the network. Orchestrating is automating in different systems and connecting them together so that something happens in the network and it's orchestrated with the firewall or something else. That's the definition of those things. Analytics is often a misunderstood term, because an awful lot of the toolkit that we're used to using is doing monitoring. It's ups and downs and pretty graphs of utilization. That's not analytics. We've been able to do that for decades. That's useful. We still need to do that, but actually getting real insights out of the things in front of us are really valuable. We at Vantage are big fans of NIST 800-207 as they define zero trust, and so going to use a lot of their language. In this case, policy decision point and policy enforcement point are really important. So knowing from device profiling or some other mechanism, what's the user and device combination, what's it for, putting it in an appropriate zone of trust, and enforcing that zone of trust across some sort of network enforcement mechanism. We're going to talk a lot more about security as we go on, but security, information security is crucial. This is a security project as much, if not more, than a network project. We often find a demand for lots more and different performance, but we never know where in the future. We're making a lot of guesses about where it's coming. And so agility is key. We see a tremendous demand for compliance enclaves. And so being able to incorporate those compliance enclaves, and I think Jelene may have some lessons learned about some of the adventures coming in with new compliance enclave demands. And then hopefully everybody got to see the movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once. From an end user perspective, wired and wireless are the same thing, Wi-Fi. When I say wireless, I mean Wi-Fi. There's different physics, but they're all the same thing, and everything's extensible to the cloud. Okay, we're not going to go into a lot of depth on 800-207. There's a presentation, actually a couple of presentations linked in the references at the end of the slide deck, where we've done some other presentations on 800-207. The document's easy to read. If you haven't, read it. It's in my mind really helpful. But these are a couple of the key pieces, right? We're going to have, well, we call it zero trust, but it's not. It's zones of trust that we ratchet down further and further over time with access rules. So having a policy decision point, that's your ClearPass or ICE or something like that, that says, what is this? What role should be assigned to it? Putting it in the appropriate zone that goes with that, and a policy enforcement point going through a firewall or some sort of rule enforcement mechanism that says, to cross your role boundary, here are the rules that apply to it. Let's see. Why don't I? There's my notes. Sorry, we have so many screens going. Want to make sure I did not miss something. And I can't move my mouse without taking away Jalene's control. All right. So, as I mentioned before, in my mind, in our mind, and I think Jelene would agree, that while the network drives the network modernizations, they are as much a security project as anything, and maybe even more security project. Almost all of the goals that we have are security-oriented goals. There's scalability, and right, the network has to be reliable. Those are table stakes. We've all needed to do that since forever. But all of the new things that we need to do aside from automation and orchestration are about enforcing improved security and complying with regulatory demands, since we're research institutions. There's a lot that comes with that.
Yeah, so we can talk about why we are here. So Central IT, as I said, we are under new leadership. We used to be under the academic affairs vice chancellor. The chancellor had created a new role. The vice chancellor of innovation created that office. And so we had a new vice chancellor of innovation that was hired. And he had published his office's vision and identified network strategic pillars, focusing on students and research first and foremost. And it really forced us in Central IT to remind ourselves who we serve and why we are here. There is a potential 10 to 15% drop in traditional incoming college students projected to occur starting around 2025. The 2008 economic recession caused a decline in the U.S. birth rates as people had either put off starting a family, or they just had fewer kids. And this is called the enrollment cliff or the demographic cliff. And your funding is determined on how many students are coming in and how many students are graduating. So how is your campus planning for that? And what does that mean for our strategic planning? Knowing what your institution's goals are and tying everything we do back to that mission, back to those strategic pillars, has been really crucial in determining what to do and what not to do, but also gives our work in the engineering group, it gives our work purpose.
That why, and really focusing on why the institution exists, your purpose. The network is there not to be a network. It's there to serve institutional mission, the research mission, the academic mission, sometimes a community mission. There are a variety of missions, but knowing what those are, knowing what people mean about them, and ensuring that everything we do is tied back to them, I think we all agree is been crucial. And in the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit more about the demographic cliff. I want to just respond to the question in the chat. One of the existential questions about the network, is it a network? Is it multiple networks? Do you have a research network separate? Many do. Should that be separate? That's a question we have to evaluate for each institution based on what those goals are. In this particular case for UIC, that was one of our existential questions. And we think we know the answer for the future of UIC, but they have not yet been merged. The probable answer for UIC is to merge with a converged network, but that's coming soon, as it were. And an awful lot of institutions are in that gap. It's waiting for that next replacement cycle or something. And maybe there's a separate facilities network. There's often many different networks, and it is a critical question. Which of those should be converged? If so, how and why, and who pays for them? Okay, so I just want to pick on that demographic cliff for a moment. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, if there's any, the Chronicle for Higher Education has done some excellent articles on the demographic cliff. There's a few others that are worth looking at. I don't think we have them in the references, but if you're having trouble finding them, feel free to reach out and we'll help you to point you at some of them. One of the things that we do when we talk to institutional leadership, I mean, provosts, deans, chancellors, presidents, people like that, is what's your plan for the demographic cliff? How are you going to survive and thrive through that? And you can see some of the very different answers that we get from that. Everything from that bottom one of haven't thought about it, which we get that answer, and honestly, it shouldn't surprise me because I've heard it before, but it does because it seems really important to their job as institutional leaders, and it's existential to the institutions. Some of the more wealthy institutions have the answer of, we're all good. Right? We've got the money, and we are a high-profile institution with plenty of students coming. We don't have to worry about it. But what I really want to focus on with this is two things. One, you need to know the answer as people trying to build towards something, but also there is a huge diversity, equity, and inclusion component to what many institutions are planning to do as a result of the demographic cliff, and trying to figure out how do you help to elevate where that mission goes, what's the impact, and how do you make sure that you are helping to support that mission and elevating people and not providing more roadblocks in the way of those who already have enough of them in their way. That's another whole presentation, but for anybody who hasn't put a lot of thought into it, please think about incorporating that so that you are in a position to shift the direction by 2 degrees, but it can have a massive impact on parts of the population. Okay, so just you can see that sort of the list of a typical project, right, where we want to learn together. As Jelene was talking about, the first while is just figuring out, what do we do now? How does it work now? And often it's both a combination of getting us at Vantage up to date, but very often amongst the university team, there's different opinions. Wait a minute, no, I thought we did it that way. No, we do it that way. And there's a lot of good conversations just learning, how does this work today? It's often not straightforward. We work on, what do we wish we could do? Can't forget about financials. Those are always important. And today we're going to focus primarily on stakeholder engagement. That is the bulk of today's conversation. When we are trying to work through this, we have to balance the let's get really technical and focus on things. And that matters for the network team. But for those stakeholders outside of the network team, with some exceptions, they generally don't care, nor should they care. They want to do their job, and we need to make sure that we understand what their goals are. So we need to understand what our guideposts are from what we wish we could accomplish, and tying back to institutional and divisional and departmental goals so that we can say, how is it that we're going to be doing something that makes them better? How do we help them be in their best possible position? Remember, going back to, why are we here? We're not here to run a network. We're here to help the various academic and research missions be most successful. We're all in higher ed. One of my colleagues' favorite descriptions for higher ed's decision-making is glacial dignity. Some schools have forgotten the dignity. Most of you have the dignity, but I've yet to see a school that doesn't have the glacial part of it. Decision-making is hard in higher ed. If you don't have a plan for that as part of your network modernization project, it is pretty difficult to be successful. So making sure you understand what that is. I have a note here about having a steering committee. I find that usually makes a very big difference. We've all been through committees that are dysfunctional. Hopefully you can build a committee that is functional. Somebody has to actually have authority. A committee that says we've made a decision, has no authority to make that decision happen, is perhaps less effective. So knowing what is governance like on your campus, how are you going to make decisions, how are you going to apply that concept of governance to your network modernization planning process, who matters, and who matters may not be just people with big titles. People are influential in a variety of different ways. So we want to understand what those ways might be. And we want to think forward to, if we're going to be asking for a lot of money, for a lot of change, or just a change in our perception perhaps, then how are we going to sell this to the campus? For example, one of the perception issues that Jelene was facing early on when we did this was they used to have an outage problem, and then they didn't. And when we talked to stakeholders, said, you guys did great work as a team. We no longer have outages. It's been awesome. And I sat down with the network team and said, so what did we do? Said, just good luck. We had some problems with facilities and fiber outages for a while, and we haven't had them for the last year. Understanding what that's about and how we're going to sell the message to campus of, yeah, all those problems, the fiber seeking backhoes missed lately. There's more to this. And I know many of you are in winter climates like I am and like Jelene is, and so the fiber-seeking backhoes are out in force at the moment, and so good luck to everybody. Campus culture varies a whole lot. One of the joys of working in so many different institutions is I get to see that diversity of thought and wildly different approaches. We have, for example, one campus where the word governance is a bad word. Thou shalt not use the word governance at this particular institution. It means something else to them. You have to know what those third rails are. Don't talk about something this way, talk about it that way. Because when you go out and talk to people, if you say something in a way that twists the message because of the way they perceive it, it's very hard to get them back on track. As an example that maybe resonates with some of you, it's not a stakeholder question, but we often, when we have network manufacturers coming in to talk about how whatever they think they can do is awesome, one of the things they often talk about is knack. And most of us who've been around a while, you all saw my picture on the first page. There was a lot. The color of my hair was different when that picture was taken, and once upon the time, the color of my hair was even more different. Knack, for those of us who've been around 20 plus years, was a very different problem, and a lot of us still remember the pain. And it's a bad word now in most of higher ed, in my experience, because we still all sort of connect it with what happened in the early 2000s. The product and the process is wildly different, but we need to not use that word most of the time. At least not without a lot of level setting of what we mean. We don't mean that other thing. And so, and then we've got here, I keep coming back to what are the goals? What are the things that matter? What are the whys for the people you're talking to? You have to know that, you have to ask that, you have to listen about that. And you're going to learn things that you probably didn't know. As you're going through this buy-in process, you're wanting to learn those goals, but you're also listening for things that affect the architecture of the network, the cost of the network, and the phasing or roadmap. To me, those are the three things that we are spending most of our time focusing on, is what changes for any of those things based on something you've told me. Several of the network modernization projects we have helped with exist because the institution did not do a stakeholder process before. They had a good idea, they had a good plan, but they didn't talk to people. And there are a lot of institutions where if you didn't ask me first, whatever you picked is wrong. That's the attitude. And so we need to be talking to people. Sometimes they really have something to say that changes everything, and that matters a whole lot, but it's the nature of higher ed. We have to go out and talk to people. When you're sitting down to do these stakeholder interviews, these are a few of our tips and experience, right? So sharing an agenda in advance, one of the key parts of that is making sure that the person who receives it knows it's there. Often we have the agenda attached to an invite and people don't notice it. So there's going to be some mechanism to poke them and say, look at this agenda. Here's some things would be great if you thought about before we came to the room, so that they know why they're here and what that's about. I can't stress enough the second one here. You're working on their terms. Hopefully most of you have business analysts or something like that. This is all about relationship building. You need to be out listening to them in their terms, not in our terms. When I had a meeting, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, where I sat down with the dean, and before I was even allowed to introduce myself, he said, I just want to know, what do you want from me, right? What do you want me to know? What do you want me to do? And what is it that you need me to share back with you? And I've really taken that to say, every time I'm writing an agenda or thinking about a meeting, I need to make sure that that's clear. I need to make sure that I know, that they know what is the whole purposes, and that they're prepared to accomplish that. And we want to think about a mechanism for sharing the summary results back out, which are often contradictory, but how is it that you're going to share what you learned? Personally, I'm not a fan of detailed meeting notes of sharing, here's what I heard from each one. I like themes. We met with 36 different stakeholder groups, and these are the things that we heard in general, not tied back to individuals for the most part, but we want the departments, want the people who contributed to feel like they were heard, and to hear some of the things that other people said that they hadn't thought about. Again, we're focusing on them. One of my pet peeves is the word requirements gathering. We are not doing requirements gathering. If you use the words requirements gathering, most people perceive that to mean speeds and feeds and exact specifications. When you're talking to stakeholders, those aren't usually relevant. It's what are they trying to accomplish? then let's adapt that to the technical requirements, but not usually in the stakeholder meetings. And if we come in and talk about requirements, we often get, here's how I want to improve what I do today, not how to accomplish my mission best. I'm going to give you an example outside of the network where we spoke with somebody who was responsible for residence hall assignments a bunch of years ago. Said, just tell me, what is your pain point? What do you wish you could do better? And she said, I'm going to spend the next month or so with my office just covered in note cards from all the residence hall assignments of the preferences, and I'm going to spend all this time aligning who should be with who in the res halls. And of course, I imagine I can't see any of you. Most of you are thinking, wait, you did what? That's what she'd always done. It hadn't occurred to her there's a system that can do this matching for her. And so if you'd asked her for her requirements were about better organizing those note cards in her room, not about, let's just make that problem go away. Most of the time when you're talking to people, nothing is going to change for you. 90+% of stakeholder interviews are the same thing you've already heard before, or a great session about wireless, or something like that. But keep your ears turned for anything that is in fact pivotal, what happens from time to time, and it can change everything. It's, in my experience, a trap to get into the technical weeds. Try to avoid it unless you're talking to somebody who really wants to. Maybe it's somebody in the computer science or engineering department or distributed IT, people who really wanted to get into those technical weeds, go for it. But be careful. And then one of those interesting questions, right? So much of what we do in IT, we say, well, let's make sure we're following the 80-20 rule or the 90-10 rule or whatever your favorite version of that is. In my experience in research institutions in particular, of which the bulk of you are responsible for networks at research institutions, this is an I2 conversation, the edge cases drive an awful lot. What I need to do as a PI, as a researcher, can change the architecture for the whole network, because it turns out that I have this thing that's distributed across several different departments, and they have a need for layer 2 extensions or extreme low latency or all sorts of wacky use cases. We need to know what those are, figure out how real they are, and how do we account for them, and whether they're going to be built into the whole thing or not. But really keeping our ears perked for those edge cases, and trying to work with the right leadership to figure out how much they really matter. So we have one of a few slides that are missing a despair.com picture. Sorry, I couldn't make it fit with all of this. I wanted to highlight a few of the stakeholders here. And Jelene, you've got a bunch of things to talk about here. I want to particularly highlight AV, classroom technology. That's one that is not usually there till we ask about it. And I want to tell you why. So AV over IP, for those of you who've had to deal with AV over IP, it is technologically challenging. A lot of the things in the AV world are not well translated in terms of jargon, practice, or implementation to the networking world, and vice versa. And they really want multicast. And for most of us, we haven't done anything with multicast, in 20+ years, because it was a thing for a while and then it died. But it's coming back. And so knowing, is that real for your campus? Is it real just for rooms by themselves, or are they going to do room combining where you need multicast to work across? That's a really big deal. Sorry, Jelene, you've got a bunch on this slide, but I wanted to talk about that piece.
No, it's fine. And this is just a subset of who we talked with, and just wanted to highlight some things. So when we brought Vantage to campus and had these stakeholder interviews, we reached out to many areas, all different aspects of the campus, and wanted to determine what technology can do to further their goals and their missions, and again tie those goals and to those overarching goals and pillars that we as central IT also wanted to achieve. So first and foremost, we made sure our CISO was fully involved in all the planning, because as John said earlier, that the network modernization projects as much as an information security initiative as they are an infrastructure initiative. So having the CISO fully involved was very important. Facilities, it was just a surprise to me that when we had met with facilities, we thought we had an idea of what they needed, their facilities, and then they had these grand plans of sprinklers, Internet of Things, and wireless door locks in areas that we don't provide wireless coverage, because our wireless coverage is typically where a student would be sitting somewhere. It wouldn't be in the basement of a building in a mechanical room where they wanted to use these wireless door locks. We found out that they were revamping their entire building automation system, and with these stakeholder conversations, we were able to have those discussions on trying to understand how we can enable them to do that. The campus planning group, getting more engaged with them to understand the long-term goals of the campus was really huge for us. Culturally, UIC has worked in silos, which is probably something that a lot on this call are privy to, but we have never gotten those plans saying, we have this 10-year master plan for this campus and this is what we plan on doing. So we've engaged with the campus planning group, now knowing what plans are for campus with building renovations or new builds, really important. And actually, UIC had acquired 3 area buildings and built 2 new buildings from the ground up in the last 5 years, which is something that hasn't been done in a very long time. And we had with another brand new building that's actually being completed this summer for the engineering college. And 2 of those acquired buildings are solely for research purposes. Again, supporting our vice chancellor's of innovation strategic goals, where research is one of his top priorities, and having buildings dedicated to research is the first on campus. A lot of our researchers are actually sprinkled in we have 110 buildings. We've got researchers sprinkled everywhere, and to have 2 buildings dedicated to research specifically is a game changer for us and very different than what we are accustomed to for campus.
I also want to highlight the Center for Teaching and Learning. Some of you may have a different name for it, but they're the group that's usually helping the instructional designers, instructional technology, faculty figure out and learn how they're going to adapt to new pedagogies, how they're going to teach in the future. And since for most of us, our dual missions are research and teaching and learning, we need to know where teaching and learning is going so that we can have whatever adjustments that match that. There may be nothing that impacts the network. There may be a ton. We need to know what those are. In the chat, if any of you have things that you've heard from people around campus with your version of these, whether you formally called them stakeholder interviews or not, something that changed everything or made a huge change in your direction, I'd love to see a little bit more about that. Let's see, next slide. So this is what we're looking for, right? Pretty straightforward stuff there, except I just, again, want to highlight the why. All of the things that we would call reports or presentations or all of that nowadays no longer focuses on the technical for the moment. It usually focuses on why it matters to them, why it matters to the people we're asking to buy into doing something. I want to point out the dovetail projects, often, particularly with facilities, right? There's many campuses have a campus master plan, a facilities master plan, something that says, here's how we're going to change the physical environment of the campus over time with new building construction and renovation and landscaping and all that kind of stuff. For IT, often our physical plant, our outside plant fiber, and our inside plant structured cabling. Jelene mentioned they still have a bunch of Cat3. It's really still a thing. That's pretty common in my experience, knowing what's happening where, because you might have an opportunity to say, look, I would really love to have new fiber in this direction. There's no way we're going to get funding to trench and do all the things for fiber. But wait, facilities has a new road coming in or a new utility corridor coming in or something like that. I can get some conduit in an existing project. That's inexpensive. And some glass, that's doable. Whole digging project, not so much. Know what's happening. I have another campus where they built a new data center and they didn't coordinate so well when they took down the building. The new data center was built in 3 years later. That's probably less than ideal. So just knowing where those opportunities are. Oh, good. Jelene's not laughing too much every time she sees this picture. It's a so knowing who it is you really have to talk to. I know it sounds like I'm harping on that, but often the people who are influential are, first of all, sometimes your biggest critics. Great, let's go out and meet them. Let's talk to them. Let's learn from them. They might have a good point. There might be something we might learn from, and they also may be in a very different part of the institution. They might be brand new faculty. They might be students. Let's not forget the students kind of matter here, right? This is part of what we're here for. They could be all sorts of different places. Really understand who they are. And one of the questions we ask in every stakeholder meeting, who else should we talk to? Is there somebody else we should talk to that this sparked an idea about? I have to remind everybody funding is an adventure in all institutions, but we need a sustainable approach. In my experience, the central reason that networks are not within a reasonable difference of where we'd like them to be for technical debt and deferred maintenance is we didn't have a sustainable funding model, right? It was come and beg for money for a big capital request every once in a while and get told, sure, in a couple of years, maybe we'll do that. If we don't have sustainability, then this all eventually falls apart. I know that is very hard to make change on, particularly in public institutions, but it's crucial. One of, I think, a really interesting question that I'm not sure we always make the best choice around is, should we go after this as a big bang project, right? One huge project with a huge funding model, it's going to be a 5-year program, or should we come in with a whole bunch of 6-month tranches and sort of work our way forward? In reality, what we end up doing is the 6-month thing. And I think we need to have a program for the larger, but which is better for your campus? Because you need to show progress and you need to show momentum. And often it's really hard to get the big bang. Sometimes it's the only way is to get the big bang. Know what's right for your campus. Also be willing to adjust your approach and your ideas based on quality feedback.
So John, there is a question in the chat right now that maybe you'd like to answer, and it's around the facilities topic and around deploying more life and safety systems that are dependent on networks. So what has your stance been on that? And are there any unease in accepting the risk and liability for putting the network in line?
So I think one of those groups that wasn't in our list, or maybe it was in our list of stakeholders, is usually risk and legal and emergency operations center. That whole cluster of people, public safety, all of those need to come together to have an active and effective conversation. And we need to know, what are we trying to achieve? What are our code requirements as interpreted by your local authority having jurisdiction? And where are we expecting those things to change? So the answer to your question seems to differ widely based on particularly the AHJ, what code has been adopted. And so as an example, there is a code requirement in the current NFPA that says that if you have a network supporting telephones as your emergency phones in an elevator, you need to have 8 hours of power, and more than that in some locations. Most people don't have that. Most people don't have anything close to that. And so that's a really interesting challenge, is make sure we know about that. Is that in fact a code that we are required to comply with, or are going to choose to? Another really difficult area is 911 location information. Whole different set of meetings. In fact, so I helped to lead a monthly call for the communications infrastructure and applications community group within EDUCAUSE. We've had a number of focus calls, and there are recordings from those calls. If you need help finding those, send me a note, I'll help you find them. That is a huge area, and it was an area of focus also for UIC's team. It's to figure out, what do we have to do for 911, and the answer seems to change a lot. Not for UIC in particular, just for everybody. Ray Baum's Act changed things. Deploying a new system changed things. There's a lot that's there. So short answer is some of this and some of that. I want to highlight one other major problem. There is some emerging code requirement to have video in elevators for the purposes of emergency communications, right? So if you particularly aimed at those who can't hear, if you only have an emergency telephone and you can't hear and you need to report an emergency, how's that going to work? So there is a emerging code requirement that requires video and a video monitoring station and all of the things that somehow have to back that on the network to make it work. Understand what those are, understand what has to be UL listed. One of my big challenges is people often make the mistake with backup generators of assuming all backup generator connections are equal. And the emergency services automatic transfer switch and the standby, the things that are not defined under legal terms as life safety, are usually not allowed to be on the same ATS. So there's a lot that comes with that. So I know I didn't give you the direct answer of here's how to do it. We're usually seeing convergence, but all of the right players have to be in the room and understand the technical, financial, and legal challenges so that they can make sure that the goals are being met.
And we do have a second question in the Q&A channel asking, not related to facilities, how do you maintain these lines of communication with your stakeholders?
So, Jelene, hoping you can jump in on that one as well. In my mind, that's effective governance. And I know that probably less than half of institutions have effective governance. Some of you do, some of you don't. But it's effective governance in building and continuing those lines of communication that you hopefully opened in this process, but also that the governance process is improved by beginning those conversations. Very often, when we do those stakeholder interviews, there is a whole bunch of stuff totally unrelated to the network modernization that comes up. Good follow-up on those of how do we help make sure that your lab can do that thing? I hadn't heard about that. Let me help you figure that out. You're building trust. Jelene, you want to add to that, and then we can continue on with the slide?
Absolutely. Our campus, we have a monthly meeting. All IT directors, distributed IT, all the directors get together, and we have our project management office actually gives a report every month of our strategic plan and our efforts that have gone on within the previous month. And if it's been stalled, it says we've been stalled for this reason. And if we have any anything that we have worked on that has moved a project along, we're giving that information. And also when a project is completed, our marketing team with Central IT is posting a article in the UIC newsletter to highlight the strategic goal that we had actually accomplished and what we had set ourselves to do, and when we accomplished it, and all the things that had gone into play, and talking to those clients in a given space. So for example, one of those research buildings that we had acquired that wasn't a UIC wired standard, there was a lot that was wrong with that building. We weren't part of the initial conversations with acquiring that building. So basically we're given a building and said, make this work on the UIC network. So every month we were giving updates on completing the wiring in that building, talking to the clients, what are their needs, where do you see that you've got microscopes that need a wired connection, but you have these devices that need a wireless connection. They'll be in these areas, and having those conversations. Completed that project, and an article had gone out to the UIC community as a whole. And then additionally, we had started, our CIO now has an annual report. We had just put out our first annual report to the entire campus, where it was a very large report because it was his first report. I think it was well over 50 pages, but it had listed all the efforts that we have been doing, and where the progress is with that. And also stating, this is what you should expect with our next announcement. These are the things that we're working on, and we're hoping to have those updates for you given the next CIO report. And we have received lots of positive feedback from all of those efforts too, because we're also not doing things behind the scene. We're making them very visible, and getting the positive feedback that it's nice to see that the efforts are in place to improve the infrastructure on campus so that they can enable them to do the thing they needed to do in this lab in this one building on the east side of campus. It's been very positive all around so far.
So this slide, this top piece, what are you going to stop doing to support this? I think that is one of the biggest challenges, right? Going back, this is true for anyone, right? Anytime in all of IT, when we want to make change, and frankly, even when we don't want to make change, we want to be looking at what are the things that we're still doing we shouldn't be doing anymore. But even more so, I suspect very few of the people on this call have lots of free time on their teams. Doing a network modernization has a load of work to get there. Hopefully as you start to make progress, it's going to ease the burden, particularly as automation happens. But until then, you're adding work. How are you going to free up staff time to do that? I think we have a bit of a lesson learned on this particular project, right? We budgeted for what I call backfill, right? Some resources to come in and help free up some of Jelene's team's time to do the work. But we haven't yet gotten that backfill team in place. And so the team is working harder and harder, but they can't do anymore, right? They were already doing more than they should have been doing in the first place. We can't add more to their load.
Yes, we've been working with, it hasn't been enough, but yes, we are working with trying to get, we wanted the engineers to be able to engineer the project for the strategic plan. We had many plans to perform proofs of concepts on basically every aspect of our network. And so we did have to ask ourselves if there were other large initiatives going on where do we consider if we should be packaging things together? How do we show our progress, which is all the reporting and the article writing, the publications that we've been doing on campus. And really, like John said, weighing what are you going to do versus what are you going to outsource? What are you going to backfill?
Just before we go too much further, as you leave, you can leave this one on the screen.
Sure.
One of the things that I have heard from others, and I'm a fan of making sure your team is fully engaged. That's my very strongly preferred approach. Is the institutional team with support from integrators, but your team really helping make key decisions and running stuff. I've heard from others that we're never going to get the backfill, so we just outsourced it. Somebody else did the work and they handed it back over. And that was very successful for many. I don't like that because it means that you don't know as much, but so often it's the only way it's going to work. So just understanding and making good decisions there, I think, is important. Okay, Jelene.
Yep. So as John said, going through the process of understanding what are you going to stop doing to support what you want to do, and are you really going to stop it? And if someone is complaining about you stopping a certain thing, do you have the sponsorship from your executives, from your leaders, that will truly make that true and say, no, we are not moving forward with whatever that thing is that we had stopped, and we needed that commitment from our leadership, and so far that's been successful on our side. And with all the planning, we've still been behind on our projected timeline. This has not been a cakewalk by any means. But it's definitely not for the lack of planning. We just can't seem to get out of our own way. So to give you an example, this is on your screen is what we had currently planned for our strategic planning. This was all, when are we doing our proof of concepts?
Pre-pandemic, right? This was just
this is
before
all
the pandemic.
Pre-pandemic. So we had given our strategic planning report to the campus February of 2020, so a month before the pandemic hit. We laid out all our plans. This is your plate of things to take care of, right? And right now, all these things that you have are just evaluations of vendors, because you don't have the funding to actually move forward. But we at least wanted to have a plan. As we've gone through all these proof of concepts for firewalling, we've now selected we want this firewall. We want funding for this firewall. But right now, we're just going through the proofs of concepts. So after we had gotten through this project, COVID strikes. We all get sent home. And what you see in dark blue is all the work that we had to go through about 2.5 to 3 quarters of time to get all the COVID response things taken care of, and everything was put on hold as we were all sent home. After we had basically gotten used to this whole hybrid remote environment and COVID had become really more routine for all of us, we had to sit down and reevaluate our plans and ask ourselves if we should continue with the strategic plan given the uncertainty of the world. And so we sat together and we collectively agreed that we still needed to continue on for the greater good of the campus. And things had changed with the campus with the pandemic. So we were also reevaluating what we were doing. Was it still matching what the campus was looking for? So we picked up where we left off with our proof of concepts. Our CIO retires, a new CTO and CIO come in, they get acclimated to the campus, and they come to our directors and ask, can you please give me a 5 to 7 year plan with estimated costs so we can evaluate all that central IT needs to do and package it into one big funding ask that we're going to call the Forward Initiative. Thankfully, luckily, we already had that in place. We had already started the strategic plan with Vantage. I already had the plans, but I did not have funding tied to it. I didn't have it documented where all of our efforts were tying back to a strategic pillar from our Office of the Vice Chancellor. So I had given all that information to our new leaders. And January of 21, we received this ginormous amount of funding for the Forward Initiative, and everything you see in green were all of the plans that we were hoping to have. Now we've got funding. Now we must work on these because we have the plan. Now we have the funding. We can execute all these things that are on your screen. And this is your plate of things that, of course, it's getting heavier and heavier as you can see all the work that now has been put on our plates. So as we go through the proof of concepts, it's clear to us that we don't have the staff to handle the day-to-day operation and execute the strategic plans on our project timeline. So we had to sit and reprioritize again. So we sat down reevaluated our goals, our capabilities to keep the fire going and keep the campus afloat in the weird hybrid remote environment. We pushed out some timelines because we just didn't have the manpower to keep going in some of the projects we had in place. And then, but it didn't take long as more projects that were not strategic plan, nor were they funded forward initiative, that were being added to our plates. So what just showed up in dark blue on your screen were all projects that were absolute projects that we had to do that were neither the strategic plan nor the forward initiative, but they had to be done. They were coming from the vice chancellor, from the chancellor's office. We had to get things moving. They were research related. They were get the classrooms up and running and fully functional for a hybrid teaching environment. All of those things were put on to our plate. So everything you see on your screen has been thrown at us, a very small team, without hiring new full-time employees. So truly investigating, getting the professional services in quicker than we have been getting in, looking at backfill, hiring engineers to come in and do the day-to-day work so that we can continue moving forward with the strategic plan, because we didn't want to lose sight of that strategic plan. So of course, there are many lessons learned in this process. With the blue project you saw on your screen, we had been forced to sit down again, reprioritize, and we just keep redoing that. That's something we keep redoing to make sure that we're on track with what we want to do. And if we have to push things off, then we push things off, but we're at least, it's still one of our goals. We're just pushing out that deadline. It was time to adapt our timelines. This will have to be something, like I said, we have to continue to do until we have permanent funding to at least double our infrastructure team. Procurement delays have also put a huge wrench in all of our planning. I'm sure people on this call have that same problem. Hiring has been incredibly difficult. I've had 2 core engineering positions that were posted in February that I've still not seen resumes for, and it doesn't look like I'll see them anytime soon. And that colorful slide that I just showed you was only till January. So looking at our next 2 to 3 years, right now, today, this is what we project that we will see in our near future. And this is subject to change as other projects come as priority, as we can't get backfill or professional services to help us with what we need to do. The pale green being our strategic plan, the dark green being the approved and funded projects, and the dark blue being the projects coming down from up high that we absolutely have to get done. There's no way around it.
So, Jelene, as you went through the last couple of years, it seems like while we expected the vast majority of your team time to be focused on these initiatives, we found that the lab, maybe 2/3 of the time were of the other emergency that came in and took it away.
Yes.
It's been pretty tough to get that. We're going to stop doing a thing to focus on this. I know we are almost out of time here. This is our joke slide of we're not those people. For those of you who haven't seen Office Space, please go fix that. Hope all of you have. We've got some references. This slide deck will be posted up with the recording in about a week or so. So these links will be in it. You can help find it, which also has our contact information. I don't think we've missed any questions in the chat. We have maybe time for maybe one more. I'm not sure, Mike, if anybody has any questions. Oh, a couple things that came up.
Yeah, if there's 1 or 2 more, let's take those.
So one of the actually questions, Chris, that was asked of UIC was whether we might deploy 5G. If somebody else would come in and do 5G for us, it would be free and that will be amazing. That has not matched anything remotely close to our reality. We didn't end up with a lot in this particular case of those kind of innovative technologies. All of our innovative technologies were around zero trust and direct research. One of the things I would love to see more of is sort of not quite muni broadband, but something that allows for good network capability with CBRS or some other things. So we could do research on and around the campus and to enable those who don't have adequate connectivity. Jelene, there was a note about the quantum network. My understanding is that you now have a researcher who's a part of that, but it's not quantum networking. this is part of a network of researchers doing quantum research, and so it's another research network to talk to.
Yes, it is. And that was something that we, as the network engineering team, didn't know about until we saw an article in the UIC newspaper that the professor was brought to campus for this thing. And so we had to reach out to our sister campus, the Urbana University of Illinois campus, and ask for input on that. So a lot of it also was the communication with campus that we're still working on with those other groups to make sure that we are ahead of the game a little bit and making sure there's a coming in. So yes, we're currently working with that professor to get him connected in the way that he needs to.
Wow. Very good. Thank you, John, Jelene, Jacqueline. Thanks so much. This was really interesting, and I agree. I think it was Claudia that said we appreciate that graphic. It's the best visual of projects overlays that many of us have seen. So thank you for sharing that. And the despair.com. That's I'll have to go look that up.
It's our favorite.
Anyway, thanks to everyone who joined us. I wanted to mention again, John mentioned it earlier that UIC and Vantage will be presenting on zero trust and role-based access control at the upcoming Internet to Community Exchange event in Atlanta. There's still time to register, so if you haven't, please consider doing that. We'd love to see you there. And then finally, a reminder that we did record it, and we'll post this along with the slides on the I2 online website. So if you have further questions, please feel free to reach out to us. And information on upcoming webinars is on our Internet 2 events page at internet2.edu/events. Thank you all, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.